We are starting a bit of a new journey today. As you guys know who have been around Crossings for some time, we often take journeys through books of the Bible. But what we will do, I learned a lesson some years ago. I think it was the series, this was quite a few years ago, did through the book of Romans, and we went straight through over 2 years, I think. And it was a blast, but I kind of sensed a little fatigue amidst the church body as we were doing that. And so ever since, like we did when we did Nehemiah, we take a part of a book and we travel through a section of it, and then we take a break sometimes. And whether it's an Advent season around Christmas or it's something else, we'll hop into that and then we'll hop back into the bigger journey. And it kind of helps us manage all of our attention spans a little bit as we go along. It's, I think, been since the beginning of time that sibling rivalry, but sibling conflict and combat have existed. I think since Cain and Abel, the words, "That's mine," "No, that's mine," have been said in all languages that have ever existed. Even when I was a kid, I remember my brother was significantly younger than me. I should have been so much more mature, but remember drawing the line in the back seat, right? During long car rides, of course, we didn't have devices and things to play or screens that dropped down to watch. And so it would draw a line. My stuff stays over here. Your stuff can't cross the line. You don't cross over here. This is my space. That's your space. These days in my home, that happens most often around chargers, device chargers. Those are a prized commodity. And what happens is our children, they lose, they can't find their charger. And so the logical solution when you can't find your charger is to search for the nearest one and claim it as your own. Whichever one you can find. Doesn't matter if it's in somebody else's bedroom or where it is, but you get it and you take it and you begin using it. And then what happens, right, is a domino effect. Whose ever room you found it in, well, they come out, "Where's my charger? You took my charger, that's my charger." "No, it's mine." And then there's this big explosion of cause and effect that happens and arguments over, "That's mine." "No, it's mine." And inevitably, that leaves us to say as parents, none of it is yours, it's all ours, we own all of it, and we can take it all away. Somewhat like Cosby's words, right? "I brought you into this world and I can take you out." It's the same idea. You don't own anything. It's all ours. None of it's yours. You can use what we say you can use. We get, as parents, oftentimes when you get into those moments and you get sick of whatever's going on, you say things that may be logical in the moment, but in the grand scheme of things are completely illogical, right? "If you don't pick up your clothes, I'm never going to do your laundry again." You say things that you really don't mean, but you say them in the moment because you don't know what else to say. All of us, I think, are born with this innate sense of entitlement. What's ours? That's mine. We believe that we deserve things. We believe that we should have them, whether it's opportunities, possessions, liberties, freedoms, all kinds of different things. Fairness. That's my favorite, by the way, as a parent. That's not fair when you hear that. Inevitably. Life's not fair. But there's these entitlements that we all grow up with. And the truth is, when we become adults, they don't just go away. The entitlements of what we think we should have and what's mine, we don't mature out of them. We just feel entitled to bigger things, bigger and seemingly more important things. We grow up into adults who believe we deserve success if we work hard enough. When we grow up and we're single, we believe that we deserve to be married. If we get married, we believe we deserve to have children. Once we have children, we believe that we deserve, if we try hard enough, to have children that don't bring significant obstacles into our lives. It's this entitlement that exists and permeates really who we are as people and just grows exponentially within our culture. When we begin to talk about provision, our culture has this functional definition of provision, and it would go something like this, simply. Provision is an entitlement based solely upon my personal interest. Provision, it's an entitlement. It's what I should have based on what I believe I should have. In cultural Christianity, which means oftentimes in the church at large, the functional definition just changes a tiny bit. God's provision is an entitlement based solely on my personal interest. You see, what we do there is we just slap God on the front as this sort of Christian duty, but at the end of the day, the same driver is driving both definitions. Provision is what I believe I should have. As a Christian, I have to say that it comes from God, but it is what I believe I should have. We quote verses like Romans 8:28. Many of you in here could probably recite it. There's Etsy stores of people who can, don't be offended if you have this on your wall at home, create this incredible sticker of this verse. And you can put it on the wall in your bedroom or your house, and it looks like somebody painted it perfectly on the wall. These are the kind of verses that oftentimes we hang our hats on or we live by. It says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So we think about provision and God's provision and what God's going to do for us. And we read that verse and we think, yes, then it's going to be good and it's going to be my definition of what's good. But we have to ask what the context of those words are. Why does Paul say that then? And we see in verse 18 of chapter 8, just before those words, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Sufferings, difficulty. And then you get to verse 26, and he's saying, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. You see, the context of that verse that we love to hang our hat on is truly about the difficulties and sufferings of life. It's amidst those difficulties that God does provide for our good, but it's a good that's beyond our expectation. It's his good. God's provision is always perfect for our transformation in his glory. Every time. God's provision is always perfect for our transformation in his glory. See, there are few desires in life that are comparable to that of a lady who desires to have a child. I have known personally several, if not many, who for one reason or another, they were not able to biologically conceive and give birth to a child. And so difficult. I could never begin to imagine or understand how that would feel, not only the difficulty internally, but the social pressure, the cultural pressure that exists. As great as that pressure is in our day today, as hard as this will be to imagine, that pressure was exponentially worse in the days of Hannah. In the days that we read about in 1 Samuel chapter 1, the pressures were so much heavier than that which we know today. You see, the wives back then, they carried this enormous responsibility because after the flood, God gave this command, right? Multiply, fill the earth. And so not only were the wives carrying this incredible pressure of God's command and this command and responsibility to multiply, to literally create people groups, but it wasn't just the pressure to have children, there was a pressure to have sons. And if they couldn't do that, some saw them as cursed, as failures, as the purpose for which they were there that they were unable to fulfill. It was an enormous weight. Sometimes, as we read about in Genesis chapter 16, a wife would offer her husband to a surrogate so that she could then be seen as someone who had children. And sometimes they would do this and not tell anyone else about it. The surrogate would have the child and the wife would claim the child as her own so that everybody around in the culture could see that, yes, I have children. I've been able to provide. I'm able to accomplish my duties. I'm able to do what the Lord commanded us to do. It was an enormous pressure. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we see Elkanah and his two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. He has children, but none from Hannah. I'm going to call him E from here on out, just for ease. E loved the Lord. It's obvious when we look at this text and the story about him that he loved the Lord and he loved his wife, and it seems as though he really loved his family well too. All around, he seems like a great man of God. And what we read about here is this 15-mile journey that they take to Shiloh. 15-mile journey where they go and they're going to worship, and he brings back Hannah more than what she deserved or customarily was entitled to. You see, the wife was entitled to an amount proportionate to the children they had. And so E brings back extra for her. In verse 5 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, it talks about this, and talking about E here, he says, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? We hear in those words the pain that Hannah felt, and it's interesting. I think E deserves some points here for his response, but I think in 2019 that would not have been the best response. Essentially what he's saying when you read that final comment is, I hear how upset you are. Are you saying that I'm not enough for you? Am I not man enough, husband enough to fulfill every need that you have? That's the wrong thing to say. It's almost like maybe they're newlyweds and he doesn't know any better is what we might think. I don't think that's the case. I think really what's going on here is thousands of years of change in time, languages, and cultures. What he's really saying to her is, I will not reject you because of this. I will not leave you because of this. You see, that would have been normal. Okay, you, wife, you can't accomplish your duty. You can't do what God's called you to do. So I'm going to reject you. And what he is saying here is I'm not going to reject you. I'm not going to leave you out there without provision. And that would have been a gift to her. You see, they both understood, we see in these words, the Lord had closed her womb. And if you're one of those people who are bold and daring enough to underline in your Bible, I would underline that phrase that happens right there twice. The Lord had closed her womb. You see, there was awareness amidst both of them at this moment that amidst the difficulty of not being able to have a child, that difficulty personally, the difficulty socially and culturally, the difficulty that existed within her own home, that the Lord was at work in the midst of it all as provider. He was working. It was an awareness that believes and says that our difficulty displays his provision. Our difficulty, Hannah's difficulty, the difficulty that exists in your life and my life and in our stories, that difficulty displays God's provision. You see, both of them understood that this wasn't a struggle that they were going through that was merely chance. It wasn't a struggle that they were going through merely because of some genetic issue. It wasn't a struggle that they were going through because Hannah wasn't good enough of a person to deserve it. And they both understood it was not something that she was entitled to. Didn't deserve it just because of who she was, but rather understood that this was in the Lord's hands. And Hannah didn't hide how difficult this was for her. When you read those words that we just read and you read the emotion that we just read, Hannah wept. She struggled to eat. Hannah doesn't hide her emotion that she feels. She understands. She says it's from the Lord. And yet that doesn't stop her from praying for a child. It doesn't stop her from crying out. That understanding of it being from the Lord changes one significant thing. It gives this understanding that regardless of the difficulty, Hannah trusted the Lord. Regardless of the difficulty that she was going through, she trusted the Lord. See, she cried out for help. She cried out. She felt every emotion. She didn't try to compartmentalize it and stuff it away. Say, I'm not allowed to feel frustrated. I'm not allowed to feel sad or hurt or devastated. No, she feels all of those. She trusted the Lord amidst them. The same thing happens with Paul. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. Paul writing, and he says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. Now listen what Paul does. Same thing Hannah did. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. He says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul responds, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weakness so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul too, why in the world would Paul have this thorn in his flesh? Here's Paul giving his entire life to serve and love Jesus and advance the kingdom. And so Paul pleads with the Lord, won't you take it away? And the answer is no. The outcome of Paul's struggle and Hannah's struggle, they're very different. Very different. Yet both of them pled with the Lord. Both of them cried out to the Lord. Paul pled with him 3 times. Hannah, deeply distressed. We read the prayer in verse 11, 1 Samuel chapter 1, and she vowed and said, O Lord of hosts, you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Both of them crying out to the Lord, pleading with the Lord. Hannah's trust in the Lord, it doesn't stop her from praying faithful prayers filled with authentic emotion, desires. Same with Paul. He trusts the Lord, but it doesn't stop him from crying out and pleading, God, would you take this away? But he doesn't walk away saying, oh, God doesn't love me, he didn't take it away. God's not in control. God's not provider because he didn't take it away. Hannah doesn't walk into this place of emotion and crying out to the Lord and say, God's only provider if he gives me what I want. You see, that's those moments where provision is defined with us in the driver's seat. Provision is what we say it should be. It's us, you and I, being entitled to what we feel like is our best interest. Eli, the high priest, he sees Hannah praying, kind of. He doesn't know what he sees at first. He sees Hannah praying, and apparently her lips are moving. She's praying, but audibly he can't hear her. So in other words, she's either whispering so low that he can't hear her, or she's not making any sound. Like many times, I think you and I would say, I know I do this, but maybe many of us, when we kind of talk to ourselves, maybe we don't realize we're in public, or our lips might move, but no sound's coming out. That's what's going on here for Hannah. She's praying. And it was common amidst these worship festivals for there to be beer and wine enjoyed. It's part of the bounty that they brought together in worship to God. And so one of the roles of the high priest, Eli here, was him, and not only him, but his sons that were present, was to shepherd and see and watch, because there were sinful people back then just like there are sinful people today. And sometimes there would be people at these festivals that they engaged sinfully in that drinking of the beer or the wine. And so Eli sees what she's doing. Her lips are moving and doesn't hear anything, and he thinks she's drunk. He thinks this is one of those moments. I've got to step up to the plate here. Now is when my job description really takes shape. And so he says something to her. And basically he says, it's time to cut you off. It says, therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman in verse 13. He thought she'd had too much to drink. She responds to him. If you look at verse 15. Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. You see, neither Hannah's nor Paul's understanding of God as the ultimate provider stop them from pleading with the Lord. His provision of difficulty in our life, his provision is in the difficulty of our life. And amidst that difficulty, God creates dependency, which is an amazing gift. Our dependency displays his provision. I've watched a lot of volleyball in my life, probably more than any other sport that I've watched, period. I love it. I really do. I love the game, but 2 out of my 3 children have played a lot of it, so I've watched a lot of it. Being a team sport, it's actually a very individual sport until about the age of 13. Here's what I mean by that. You go, and at those early ages, this is a horrible thing as a parent to say, but sometimes it can just be hard to watch. It can be hard to watch because here's what happens. The entire game or the match is all about the person serving the ball. If they can serve the ball over the net, win, that's a point, and that's how every point seems to go. Did they serve it over the net? They got a point. They didn't? Okay, they didn't get a point. And that's how the entire game goes. That's actually very much an individual sport. I got to watch two things. I actually saw on my middle daughter's team this take shape in literally a one server winning a game with 25 straight points. That was the game. Serve, ace. Serve, ace, point. 25, game over. It can be an individual sport. My oldest daughter coaches a team of second graders, and a couple weeks ago, I ran out of church early to be able to watch. It was also her birthday weekend. We're sitting there on the stands, and girl serves the ball, and if she serves it over the net, and the parents go wild, jumping up and down, celebrating, excited. But if girl serves the ball over the net, and somebody on that other side touches it, parents of both teams go wild. Everybody's up on their feet. It doesn't matter where the ball goes either. If they touch it and they shank it way off in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter. That girl touched the ball that was served over the net, and they erupt in excitement. You see, once you get to the varsity level, though, of playing that sport, it becomes a team sport. It has to be. Every single player on the court realizes and sees that they are dependent on one another. Matter of fact, the conversation goes even farther, and you hear conversations about chemistry, connection, which goes beyond the skill of one player, and you begin talking about this idea that it's not only about the skill of an individual, but it's about how they submit to one another. And it's an amazing picture to see when a team actually gets to a place where they realize they're dependent on one another. They're willing to lay down their aspirations of personal glory for long enough to submit to one another and function as a team. And the teams that get there, they get there one way. Somewhere along the way, they tried as individuals and failed, realizing that they needed one another. They needed that dependency. In that failure came growth. Other teams that you watch and you see, they never get it. They never get it. They're playing as individuals all the way through the career of that particular team. See, you and I, we are stubbornly selfish people. All of us. Me, I'll get at the first of the line. Stubbornly selfish. We're stubbornly selfish, and we exist in this place where we're not ready to hear the truth of God's word until we've exhausted every other effort and hope. In our culture at large, or even our Christian subculture, We're not ready to hear and talk about the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ until we've tried everything else and failed. Then we're ready to have a conversation about God and the gospel and the hope that he offers. In our community, geographically speaking, our community at large, here we are. We're in this place of predominantly upper, middle class, well-educated, successful people. Hearing that Jesus came and he lived a life that they can't live. You and I, can't live. He conquered something that they, including you and I, could never conquer. Offering a hope that they and you and I could never discover. You see, that doesn't resonate to the ears that surround us until they come to a place where they realize their own failure, Till they've tried all of these things and realized that they couldn't do it on their own. They've tried and they failed amidst despair in marriage of trying to make this relationship work and trying every strategy and failing over and over again. That's the moment where the hope of the gospel is heard. Amidst the health issues, medical problems, where every strategy, whether homeopathic, pharmaceutical, is tried over and over again, and then they're all failed and there's no answers. Once we exhaust ourselves and the avenues available to us, then it seems we're ready to turn to God. Amidst the despair of addictions that exist in our life, it's substance abuse of some kind of addiction that pulls you to a screen, the wreckage of relationships that follow those addictions. As stubbornly sinful people, we try everything that we can do and exhaust all hope that we have and try and fail over and over again before we're ever ready to hear the hope of the gospel. So the circumstances of life that facilitate our dependency on God are His gracious provision to us. Those seasons in life that they facilitate our dependency, the seasons of life that take us to that place where we say, I can't do it, I can't fix it. Those places are a gift from God. Because you see, you and I, we wouldn't say that any other way. We wouldn't get to that place any other way until we were taken to our knees, until we saw our own inability. Do we take our eyes up to Jesus? You see, whether the season in our life is like Paul's, where God's answer, His provision is, my grace is sufficient for you. In other words, His answer is no, right? Paul asks, would you take this away from me? God basically says, no, but my grace will get you through it. Or if the seasons of our life are like Hannah's, where she conceived and gave birth to a son, all of those seasons, regardless of the outcome, are seasons of gracious provision from God in our lives. As we look at the end of chapter 1 here, verse 19, we see how the Lord responded. It says, they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. And they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife. For those of you who don't read a lot of Bible, that's not a conversation that happens over coffee right there of knowing each other's favorite foods and colors. That's an intimacy there that's spoken of when Elkanah knew his wife, explained by the following words. And in due time Hannah conceived, bore a son. She called his name Samuel. For she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. If you skip down to the end of this, we read as she takes him back to the high priest in verse 26. She says, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed. And the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. Sometimes in Scripture, because again of the years and the language difference between what you and I read and what they were writing, there's beautiful plays on words that are there that we miss. This is one of those moments. You might read, even in our English version, why in the world does she repeat this idea over and over again? Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. Maybe there's just this little light bulb. You say, there must be something going on there. Well, there is. Different forms of the same root word are being used there. And actually, it's the same root word for Samuel's name. So it's actually 4 different times that this root is used there, and all around between Samuel's name, the naming of him, then as we get to the end, lent him to the Lord. What Hannah is emphasizing here is that God gave him, and I'm going to give him back, and he's going to be called the one that was given and given back. Hannah's just affirming that she's not entitled. She didn't deserve it. God didn't owe her anything because she cried out in prayer. God's response doesn't make him a good provider or a bad provider. He is. See, whether the Lord gave her a child or not, he is the provider. Whatever his provision was, whatever that looked like in Hannah's life, her obedience to the Lord would display that provision. Paul responded by saying, right, remember, I will boast in my weakness. That was his response. Hannah responds, he was yours to give and he's yours to have. Our obedience displays God's provision. Last, our obedience displays God's provision. The perfection of God's provision is not dependent on him meeting our desires. That's the way we think about it, right? Because of our entitlement. This is the way I think he should move in my life, and this is how I define good for me. So if God is a perfect provider, he will finish this equation. That's not the provider, the all-knowing God that we worship. His provision is perfect for our transformation and his glory. You see, this means that if you're in a place in your own story right now and you're praying and you're crying out to God, much like we see Hannah and Paul do, and you're crying out for a new job, but the way that God moves is he has you staying in the job that you're at. His provision is perfect for your transformation and his glory. If you're in a place where you're crying out to God and you're praying for healing of medical and health, and God heals, his provision is perfect for your transformation and his glory. If you're in a place where you're crying out to God for financial provision and you inherit millions of dollars, his provision is perfect for your transformation and his glory. But if the rest of your story, when you cry out for financial provision, is that you have to struggle and fight for every single penny that you have for the rest of your life, his provision is perfect for your transformation and his glory. I want to read to you one last passage of scripture. If you remember, there was a moment in the life of Jesus where he went through something very similar to this. Paul and Hannah. And so, listen to the words of Jesus. Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. His sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. It's the same thing, but from the mouth and the heart of our Savior. It's a prayer. God, can't there be another way? And yet you and I know, as we've read the rest of the story, that it's only moments later that he's betrayed and arrested, denied 3 times, mocked, beaten, and nailed to a cross. Rising again 3 days later. his provision is perfect for our transformation and his glory. I think the question for you this morning is, do you trust him? Do you trust him? Do you trust that he is that perfect provider? Do you trust him? And if the answer is yes, if so, well then this morning, it's the best time ever to just come and lay those difficulties and those emotions at his feet. Just like Hannah, just like Paul, just like Jesus himself. You don't have to filter that. You don't have to hold it back. You trust him and you cry out and say, God, this is what I'm asking for. This is what's going on. This is how I feel. You lay those circumstances at his feet. And then you trust him. You trust him in the moments that you don't get what you're asking for. You trust him in the moments that you do, that he provides. Maybe exactly how you were asking and expecting. But no matter what, he is a perfect provider. But if you're here this morning and you hear that question and your answer is, no, I don't trust him. Well, then my invitation to you is to place your faith in Jesus. Place your faith in Jesus. Believe, confess with your mouth your inability. Stop trying and proving it to yourself over and over again every day of your life, and realize that you can't fix it. You're not good enough and you don't deserve it. But he was good enough. He did fix it and he deserves it. That's why he came and accomplished what you could never accomplish. Believe, trust in him. Begin what we call a relationship with Jesus, our perfect provider, who provides perfectly for our own transformation and for his glory. I want to invite you to bow your head and close your eyes. And before we approach these communion tables, my encouragement to you is that you might take a moment in the presence of God and wrestle with that question. Do you trust him? Maybe this morning there's something or many things that you need to cry out in prayer. Maybe there are things that, like Hannah, you are deeply distressed. Maybe like Jesus himself, in agony. Well, then do so. And trust him. Trust who he is, who he said he was, who he says he is, who he was, who he is, and who he will be. When you're ready, if you've placed your faith in Jesus, whether that was 10 minutes ago, 2 minutes from now, or 50 years ago, if you've placed your faith in Jesus, you're welcome at these tables. Take the bread, which represents Christ's body that was broken for you on the cross. Dip it in the cup, which represents his blood that was shed for you. And as Paul says, proclaiming his death until he comes. Father, we love you and we need you and we worship you. And God, we thank you that you are a perfect provider. Your provision is perfect, always, forever. So, Father, might you swell up in us a trust and a faith in that, to believe regardless of the circumstances that exist in our lives today, God, that you are provider amidst every single one of them, Father, and give us the courage that Hannah had, the courage that Paul had, to cry out with the emotions that we feel, Father, and then trust you with what you do with it, how you provide, trusting that it's perfect, it's always perfect. And God, we just confess this morning that we need you. We are completely enabled without you. So come and fill us up today. Come and fill us up. Courage and faith, belief. Father, with your Spirit, God, that we would walk out of these doors today completely different than the way we walked in them.